Good afternoon and welcome to Socialsuite's ESG webinar series. My sincere apologies for kicking us off a little bit late today. The joys of technological glitches at the last moment. My name is Hisham Sayed and I'm one of Socialsuite's ESG specialist management coaches. I'd like to thank you for taking time today and joining our webinar on 6 tactics to leverage your ESG credentials. So while a few more people are joining us, it would be great to know where everyone is calling in from today. Let us know your location in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. It would also be fantastic to hear where you are on your ESG journey. Perhaps you are still unsure how to get started with ESG, or you may have already started ESG reporting, and perhaps you may have even published your first ESG report. Let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, so please make sure to post any questions you may have, and we will get back to them towards the end of this 30-minute webinar. Now, before I introduce today's speakers, I'll share a very quick introduction to Socialsuite. Socialsuite is an Australian software company and a global leader in impact technology. We help organizations measure and report the impact they have on the world. Since 2014, we have helped over 1,500 organizations disclose impact and create value. With our ESG software platform, we help companies to get started quickly and easily with their ESG journey. We focus on helping small and medium-sized companies with ESG reporting. But this work is with companies across all industry sectors and various exchanges around the world. I would like now to welcome and introduce today's speakers. First off, we've got our Chief Impact Officer, Dr. Siegenbeek Van Heukelom. Tim is an ESG specialist with broad knowledge of the ESG landscape and reporting requirements. He is joined today by our guest speaker, Josh Geelan, who is a partner at KPMG Australia. Josh has a background in SME tax, advisory, and compliance with a strong focus on ESG and corporate reporting. He has deep and practical expertise developing ESG risk and reporting strategies, delivering ESG stakeholder and strategy workshops, and ESG solution design. You are clearly in good hands today to hear from Tim and Josh on the 6 tactics to leverage your ESG credentials. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Tim.
Excellent. Thanks, Hisham, for that great introduction there. And welcome, Josh. It's great to have you today.
Thanks, Tim.
So what we'll do today is the core focus today is really on how can we leverage ESG credentials. You've got your first report in your hands there. And what are 6 common areas to look at: strategy, tactics, and examples. We'll really quickly go through a few slides and a little bit of discussion first on why is ESG important, and from ESG urgency to your first report. But the core of our session today, we'll really focus on those 6 common areas there. And then we'll have a bit of time at the end there to answer any questions. So Hisham said he'll be monitoring the chat there. So if you have anything to ask myself or Josh, just put it in the chat and we'll get back to you at the end of the webinar. So first off, why is ESG important? Very clear here, a statement, one of the largest investment funds in the world, BlackRock. Larry Fink said, we focus on sustainability not because we're environmentalists, because we are capitalists and fiduciary to our clients. So it's really about a change there in thinking around how do we assess a business performance and business value there. We're no longer just looking at the bottom line, traditionally the yardstick. What do the financials tell us? There's another element there. A key part is looking at that non-financial reporting. Is that what you see as well, Josh, that move towards that additional element in assessing a company's performance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's that concurrent prioritization of people, planet, and prosperity. So that going forward, investors recognize and businesses recognize that it is much broader than just financial, although financials and financial performance and valuations can actually be impacted positively or negatively by those non-financial KPIs as well.
Yeah, so we see this change kind of really playing out today, and we'll get back to this a little bit later when we talk about those 6 core areas that are really closely linked to that non-financial reporting component here, which is environmental social governance. So to get there, we've seen in the chat here, there's various degrees that people are in that ESG journey. Some are looking to start, some are feeling the urgency and already on the journey. But then at some point, you get to that first report. But getting there can be really hard. So we see a lot of people, specifically in that small to medium-sized segment, thinking ESG is overwhelming. It's time-consuming, expensive, complex, difficult. It's all these things and more. And to a degree, that's true. But that's really where we saw a big opportunity there to help, in particular, the small, medium-sized enterprise to get started. It's not about being perfect. We'll talk about it a bit later there, but it's really getting started. So at Socialsuite, we really help you with a platform, coaching, and get you to that first report. Now, there's a lot more that we can say about what we do at Socialsuite, but today we really want to focus on how do you get value once you get to that first report? Why is that so important? So I really want to jump into there to what we just earlier said is financial disclosures, non-financial disclosures, and those 6 common areas to which you can create value from ESG. And we see the 6 there sitting there. And what we're going to do, Josh and I, today is really talk you through each one of those areas there. And what we'll talk through is about strategy. So what does it really mean? It's a bit of a description, a strategic approach to that particular area. We'll focus then on what are some tactics you can use, some more practical things. But then the key there is, like, you can hear all the theory, but let's make it real. Let's grab some real life experiences and examples that we both have seen in the work we do about how do you actually get that value from ESG. So straight up, let's jump into that first one there, accessing capital there. It's really about getting that ESG report and your credentials there to position yourself and your business for ESG investment. So being proactive here helps a lot. It's not about being perfect straight up. It's about a commitment, demonstrating with that first report that you actually have done the work there and following through. So it is a journey there. And just what do you see in this area happening in terms of tactics, accessing capital there at large? Like, some people really kind of define this quite narrowly, the accessing capital, but I think you have some really great views on that.
Yeah, look, thanks, Tim. I think a lot of people can see ESG through that risk and compliance, and it's painful, it's hard sort of lens. But this accessing capital piece is a really good way, and one of those really shining positive lights around ESG. So if you get this right, whether you're a not-for-profit or a corporate, you can use it really well. And we've seen it actually played out quite nicely in reality as well with some clients around accessing capital. So if you're a not-for-profit, that could mean corporate money, social impact bonds, even debt. So new forms of capital, or non-traditional forms of revenue coming in as well. But if you're a corporate, increasingly we're seeing that coming through venture capitalists, private equity firms, and even institutional debt and equity as well. So that is actually really critical to think about what business you're in or what organization you're in, and what's your mid to long-term plan. Because if it does involve a business sale or venture capitalist, or a private equity sale or partial sale at sometime in the future, or if you're listed, certainly these is accessing these capitals and being aware of these things are really important. So, for example, some of the PE funds and venture capital funds that we work with are increasingly putting ESG metrics across their target screening process and in embedding that into their investment methodology. So if you're a business going through and one day going, you know what, we're going to list on the ASX, or one day we want to sell down to a private equity firm or a VC to help fuel the next stage of growth, you really need to be considering the sorts of screens they're going to be putting over you. Also increasingly with banks. So we know that CBA, NAB, most of the big banks now have green debt, social impact bonds, and those sort of things. So if you go and commit to certain ESG outcomes, you can actually get access to potentially faster and cheaper finance in return for committing to do that. So a couple of examples from myself down here in Tassie, where I'm based. The University of Tasmania has just released the largest green bond in Australia for universities, $350 million with a 10-year and 20-year bond. That was co-backed by NAB and CBA, and effectively enabled the university to raise a large amount of capital at a lower rate in return for achieving certain green outcomes as part of that project. That bond was actually oversubscribed, which is incredible. So certainly at the larger scale, we're seeing a lot of traction in that space, but certainly for smaller companies that are growing, that private equity and venture capitalist space is getting a lot of traction for this as well. And really don't forget the not-for-profits, Tim. So we're seeing a lot of space where not-for-profits are using ESG and saying, well, hey, that's us. Like that's the work we do, particularly S or E or both of those. How can we position ourselves using ESG to access new capital? Can we get debt? Can we partner with corporates better and align and enable them to deliver their ESG programs? What about impact investors? And what about these private equity funds and family offices? If they have ESG strategies, how can we be the ideal partner for them and access that money? And so some of the tactics we've got there, it really pays to be genuine and proud about what you're doing. So as Tim said, ESG is a journey. No one expects you to be perfect now or tomorrow if you start the journey today. You do need to start, and we'll talk a bit later about the golden 80-20 rule. But really think about who are those investors or who are those sources of capital, what's important to them. And you don't want to partner with anybody. You want to really pick that partner that really aligns to your brand and your values. And importantly, the ESG outcomes you're either trying to achieve or you need to then mitigate those impacts. So don't rush out and pick anyone. Do make it a really conscious decision, but start the journey and do it well.
A great point, Stan. I think what I'm hearing is, and that's spot on, is that regardless of what type of organization you are, whether you are for-profit, non-profit, whether you're listed or unlisted, like ESG is really becoming a key assessment tool for investors, funders, the market, stakeholders at large to look at how are you transparently and responsibly operating and governing your organization. So it's really important. So it doesn't matter if you're listed already or if you're still about to list or if you're a private company and it's going to stay that way. It's really a way of demonstrating how you're doing things. And when you're ready in terms of this particular area here to access capital in one way or another, whether it's debt from a bank or whether it's investment from some type of investor there, you've got with ESG reporting ongoing, you've got the answers to a lot of the questions investors have ready. So a lot of the screening that investors are doing, they just go through your business quickly and see, does it tick the boxes? Are they doing the right things there? And if there's no ESG at large, there's no report, there's nothing there, they'll move on. But generally won't just come to you and ask, can you please make an ESG report? They can't find it easily. So that's the key there about publish, share, and promote your ESG credentials and report. It needs to be visible. And a great example there is one of the companies we work with is Latin Resources. Started working with us last year, and they were really genuinely committed to demonstrating all the work that they're already doing on the ground. They said a lot of these metrics we need to report are already there. We just want to capture it in a standardized framework and get that really visibly out to all our stakeholders, including our shareholders, but also for potential next investment. So they started to work. They've really worked their way through that. And in February this year, they had that first ESG report out covering 2021, very comprehensive report. And with that, a month later, they did a cap raise. And out of the 35 million they raised, 50 million came directly from a Canadian electrification and decarbonization fund, very heavily ESG focused. So you see that these things pay off immediately. You've got your credentials there. It's visible. So it's a great example and testament to the genuine and real work like a company like Latin Resources has done there. So access to capital, key area there, really something to focus on. You might not need capital right away, but at some point in time, you might need to look to investors, or you're planning a big change in your business, and having those credentials ready is a key area there. So from then, moving to the other one you mentioned, this is the first thing, Josh, that a lot of people come to mind. The first thing is, ESG equates to risk. Well, it's not all of it. Definitely one of the key areas there. ESG is much more than just risk. It is indeed part of thinking about ESG. There's an element there of understanding ESG-related compliance as well. So what is happening in the compliance side of things? Regulation around ESG, what jurisdiction are you in? Is ESG for you voluntary reporting? Are you proactively disclosing information? Is there in your jurisdiction anything happening at the moment around compliance? And we at Socialsuite really monitor that space really closely to make sure that the people we work with are really clearly informed by us about what is happening in their space. And from a risk management point of view, it's really important that you clearly disclose and explain how do you identify risks, and not just the traditional ones, but the new and emerging ones, the ones around the E, the climate ones, the ones around the S that everyone's talking about, diversity, inclusion, and what's your appetite and threshold around particular risks. The flip side of that is, of course, there's also opportunities often around ESG, but we'll get to that in one of the next areas there. So when we look at this, and you already flagged the 80-20 rule there and creating an ESG safe space there, I think there's a really, really key point. Can you tell us a bit more about that, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. So pardon me. So I've got the view that that ESG isn't a silo. So at first glance, if you look at how broad ESG can be across E, S, and G, and you start to think about climate, modern slavery, anti-corruption, tax, discrimination, all of the above, that can get quite overwhelming. And so often we see that, okay, we have to treat ESG as its own risk. And maybe this is going to open up, if we do start reporting on these issues, areas where we aren't perfect, potentially if we don't do anything about it, are we negligent? But if nothing else, are we going to be held accountable for that lack of performance or otherwise there as well? So there is a bit of hesitation with entities around the fear of the unknown. And so what we need to do is create that safe space. And I've got this 80-20 rule, which is basically 80% of the gain and the benefit you can get from ESG comes from being transparent and starting that journey. If you start that process and you disclose really carefully and clearly around particularly how you do the governance side of it, so upfront, how do you identify risk, how do you identify who our stakeholders are and what's important to them, and how we select those material topics, it doesn't matter if you're not perfect. If you're really robust in how you've done that, and you're not trying to hide anything and be clever about how you're selecting which topics and parts of frameworks you're applying, you're going to build a lot of transparency. And even if, for example, you say, you know what, we have 100% of our board, for just a random example, is older age white males. That doesn't fit with our diversity and inclusion policy and best practice. We know that's not perfect, but we're going to report on it anyway because we know that's what we have right now. The important piece about that is, yes, you've recognised that is what it is. It's truthful. You've recognised that it's not perfect, and you do have a transition pathway to change it, and you report that as well. And so what you do is you give your stakeholders confidence and transparency around, this is how we do things. Here's where we are now. We know it's not perfect, but here's the plan to fix it and improve it continually over that journey. That is 80% of that benefit. The remaining 20% comes from actually delivering on those promises. So they're not hollow promises. They're not hollow strategies and net zero promises that come to mind straight away, because we often hear about, okay, we're going to be net zero by 2040 or 2030 or 2050 or whatever it is. And we don't often see a lot of detail about how's that going to happen. So you do have to have that pathway and that plan to achieve it. But if you can do those three bits right, you are ticking off the majority of that opportunity that you have sitting right there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point there. And so in terms of examples here, like in particular compliance, the SEC, a regulator in the US, is clearly looking at that space and looking at climate and climate-focused regulation around the world, in particular TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, is really taking off there. There's a big piece on the standardization of the ESG frameworks in the world happening. So there's a lot happening in this space. But we really, like, if you work with, with people around you that really follow that space, it's a lot easier. You don't have to do all the online searches yourself. You can talk to some people that really know what's going on there. But to Josh's point, getting started today is really important because it demonstrates that you're on that pathway. You've kicked off the journey. And kicking off that journey links really clearly to this next area there. Just doing the work in the background is not enough. It is really about providing simple, positive narrative for your investors, but also information flow. So this really goes to that point of transparency. Do it well. Don't worry about the perfection, but share where you are. Demonstrate progress. Demonstrate that you're doing things actively and that you're listening to your stakeholders. So it's really about understanding from your investors what is material to them, from your stakeholders. What do they believe you should be reporting on there? And in terms of the examples there, Josh, where are we in terms of the ASX? What's happening there? Investors thinking around ESG. What do you see happen in that space?
I think it's a really interesting space, and we're watching what's happening in the United States with the SEC clamping down on greenwashing, and more recently with ACCC and ASIC also saying they're going to clamp down on greenwashing. So the large majority of ASX listeds last year did report on ESG in some fashion. What you'll notice though, if you jump on a few of those impact, sustainability, ESG reports, whatever they choose to call them, whether a standalone report or part of the annual report, a lot of them look really glowing. And you know that some of these entities do have issues that are even quite public issues. And so the key thing there, and the key risk and opportunity that comes out of that is, well, hang on, if you're going to publish these things and no one's going to believe them anyway, or let us see it as washing, how do we build that confidence? And the piece that's really missing, and all the ESG frameworks talk about the need to disclose, the transparency and the governance around how you do this. It really comes down to materiality. And by that I mean, who are your stakeholders and what is important to them? And actually being really transparent and genuine about how you measure that, how you consult with those stakeholders, and how you identify those material areas. Because what you'll find is if you do that internally, that's a great start. But if you go externally and talk to your shareholders, your investors, your communities, your staff, other parts of the world that you operate in, they will have some interesting views, both negative and potentially positive as well. If you're really defined and honest about how you do that process, you're going to end up with a really clear, this is our framework, and these are the components of that framework that are really important, warts and all. If you can do that, then put that on the ASX or in your annual report or as a separate impact or ESG report, then you're going to start building some confidence that these guys are doing it. That's a tick, but they're doing it really well. They're honest about it. They are consulting broadly. They're not treating it like a tick in the box or a greenwashing exercise. The biggest risk is doing it for that purpose. People are seeing through that now. People are quite wary about it. And we do have ASIC and the ACCC really taking a close look at that this coming year, about if you're going to make those sort of commitments and promises and statements, how are you backing them up? Are they genuine, et cetera, et cetera? So the takeaway is you do want to use a robust, credible and reliable framework. Socialsuite uses the World Economic Forum framework. That's a very credible framework. So there are a bunch of frameworks out there, and that's the issue with ESG at this time. The risk is in trying to be too clever in how you do that materiality piece. So I think this year, Tim, what we'll see is an increasing number of ASX listeds reporting on ESG, but I do think we are going to see a lot more compliance activity and a lot more focus on making sure that there's genuine information flows that are going back to those investors from an investor protection perspective as well.
Yeah, no, great points there. So it's really about be genuine about what you do, start a journey, be genuine, be transparent, and demonstrate the things you're doing. So really get it out there. Some great points there. Thanks, Josh. Now, next one there, and this is it's quite an interesting area here, profitability and growth. So how can you use your ESG credentials to really drive more profitability, drive growth? Well, one of the key areas that a lot of people straight away think around is, this is great. We can help attract, but also retain talent. A lot of millennials are really thinking about, what's the purpose of the organization, going beyond mission and vision. Like I want a strong purpose personally, but also on that corporate level there. But the other element is there, we spoke about risk earlier, is about ESG thinking in your business. So thinking around ESG more as a business as usual, embedded in everything you do, can really help identify some new opportunities. And a great example that we've seen is working with one of our customers, Mineral Resources, doing a lot of agricultural fertilizer work in Angola, in Africa. And they found that they were already doing a lot of great work that they actually could use to develop carbon credits. So they found out through ESG reporting and looking into what it all meant, starting that journey there, that it could actually, as a massive opportunity for them, an additional income stream, something they were effectively already doing, but they never knew existed. So they found a massive opportunity there. What do you see happen in this space, Josh?
I'll give an example from ourselves, actually. So if you think about KPMG as a professional services firm, we sell time. And to sell time, we have to have the best talent. We have to attract the best talent. We have to retain and develop that talent as well. And so this is just a snapshot from our graduate program website, which is a public website this year. So you can see the 4 reasons why you should join KPMG as a graduate, including inclusion and diversity, flexible work arrangements, 26 weeks of paid parental leave, and ESG. Now, of course, all 4 of those things are actually ESG. So KPMG as a firm published our first impact report last year. It's a standalone impact report. That report highlights some things we do quite well and some things we don't do quite well. But importantly, it talks about where we are now, where we want to be, and how we are going to get there. But in terms of getting that best talent, that's what the graduates and the millennials of this generation really want to see. They are attracted to and want to work and have work design that supports that for purpose mentality. So they're really attracted, and we said it's a key competitive advantage, living and breathing ESG, that we can attract people in that space and also retain them. The challenge then is you can't retain talent just by attracting them. You have to then make sure your work design and your organization's purpose actually delivers on that same promise as well. Otherwise, they're just going to leave. So that is really critical, Tim. And I think a lot of our clients are seeing similar issues in it's a really tight labour market. Everyone is competing for the same talent. How are you going to do that? How are you going to attract the best people and get them really engaged and productive? And this is a really great strategy to use.
So I think here the same thing goes with ESG. If you make the commitment, you have to follow through. So I think the design of, if you commit to this as an organization, you have to make sure that you follow through delivering that to your employees. So that's the key thing there. But it can drive a lot of value within your business. Yeah. And with that, reputation and branding, like it's really something that goes hand in hand with ESG. Of course, again, this goes to the point you made earlier about greenwashing. ESG can't just be for the sake of polishing up your image. Like it's part of it, it helps, but ultimately it needs to be genuine and it needs to be something you really do well and really demonstrate your improvements and your progress there. But it really helps to, for people to understand your brand, to really see what your value proposition is, what your purpose is in the market there. And if we then look at some examples there, we had a good example there where a mining operation working on a big mine, they said, well, no one wants a big hole in the ground next to that, next to the backyard. But what we need to do is we need to really clearly report on why we do this, how we do this. We do it in the most responsible and transparent way. And what we're getting out of the ground are critical minerals. And those minerals end up in the batteries that you are using in your phone, in your electric vehicle, in your batteries that you got, for your solar storage there. So to give you all those devices and to give you the energy transition, we still need to get those materials and critical minerals and resources out of the ground there. So for our reputation and branding, we need to really make sure that we do the process, the business model responsibly, but we need to make sure we clearly communicate that work as well, because otherwise we got a problem there. So we need to do it well, but also tell that story again. What do you see happening here, Josh?
Well, I completely agree. I think your brand is who you are. And if you think about ESG as being everything you do, not something you do, it becomes pretty clear that ESG can really support your brand, or ESG can quickly erode and undermine your brand as well. So it is really critical to think about who you are, what your brand stands for. And if you start to think about your values and what your brand stands for internally, but also how people perceive that externally, you'll see a lot of ESG themes actually coming out in that as well. And so as soon as you do that, you can sort of work out what are those key linkages and alignments from ESG to our brand. How do we build that through our marketing and communications? And how do we make sure our ESG strategy supports our brand and our image and our culture, and that all of that's actually embedded and integrated as well. And some good examples there, let's say Patagonia. So they are ESG. That is their market differentiator. They live and breathe it, and they have done it for a long, long time, even though the ESG term probably wasn't around when they started. Other examples there include Tasmania. So that clean, green image, that is central to brand Tasmania and what people think about Tasmania as a state and how we create sustainable development down here as well. BlackRock, which obviously you mentioned before, Tim, and we're seeing increasingly institutional private equity, family office, looking to look at brand or social license and how ESG interacts with that as well.
So it's a key thing there. So it's really important with this. The takeaway here is ESG can create a lot of value around reputation and branding, but it should not be the only thing you do it for. It should be genuine. It should be something that you really do to be better and be more transparent in how you operate your business and govern your organization. Final area then, and this one, measurable achievement, is quite an interesting area in that sense. What we see is also somewhat linked to that greenwashing there is that people are a bit, bit grown wary around the whole ESG cowboy, people who's doing different frameworks that they feel that, oh, we'll make our own framework, we'll provide our own metrics there. It's really about, are you using a credible way to report? Are you doing it, again, transparently? And what we see is in this area, it's quite important as well. From examples we see is that if you do ESG reporting well, you're collecting data, you're measuring how your organization is doing things. And that really helps to back up goals and targets you might set at an organizational level. So we see a lot of organizations say, oh, we do ESG because we align with the SDGs. Well, that's great, but you need to demonstrate how do you actually contribute to them. And by starting to do ESG, you're really starting to have some data in hand to demonstrate that. What do you see in this space around how could this help organizations create value?
Look, I think people are getting aware of the ESG cowboy. One thing you can do to really create value in this space is use very clear and simple language. Like you can go and read a lot of these yourselves, and a lot of the sustainability impact ESG reports, they use either very vague grandfather statements and language or really complex language, a lot of acronyms, and a lot of it's there to sort of create confusion or the illusion that a lot of great things are happening. But if you put yourself back into, well, who's the audience, who is going to actually read these reports and these disclosures, are they going to understand it? Because a lot of this stuff is quite complex. So how do we make sure that as part of that stakeholder process, we understand, one, who those stakeholders are, what's important to them, and also we have to report back to those same people in their language about what's important to them. So you have to be really careful about using overly complex or jargon or other, really vague statements. Keep it simple, keep it relevant, and use their language. And also consider the pub test. So if you are going to make a claim in your ESG report, would it stack up down at the pub? Can you go to court and back that up as well? So I'm all for transparency and having credibility and trust, but make sure it's genuine. There's nothing worse, and there's nothing worse as a risk than putting in some fluff or something you can't actually back up in that report. And with ASIC and the ACCC really clamping down in this space, organisations just won't get away with it in the future. Yeah,
great points there. The pub test is the ultimate one. Can you explain and defend what you're doing in simple language? I love that. This really, we're just slightly over time there, but we're always trying to keep it to 30 minutes. And I see in the chat, Sham's already answered some questions there. So we'll get back to you really soon on any outstanding questions there. And I'll hand it back to Hisham to wrap up this webinar for today.
Look, thank you very much, both Tim and Josh. And I know that, Tim's got a hard deadline that he needs to get on a plane this afternoon. So it's unfortunate that we've come to the end of today's sessions. But if you'd like more information on anything you've heard today or on how you'd like to start your ESG journey, please feel free to contact Tim or Jess at Socialsuite or Josh at KPMG. And I just want to thank you all for your time this afternoon and have a great afternoon. Cheers. Bye.